We're nearing the end of the year, and that means the launch of a new season of Fishful Thinker Television. We're going to look at all the key things that kept us successful over the whole season of filming on this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast. I'm Chad LaChance, and you're listening to Fishful Thinker, the podcast. All things fishful, all the time. Hey guys, Chad LaChance here. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast, brought to us as always by the fine folks at Sportsman's Warehouse. You can visit them at sportsmans.com or any one of 140 plus stores nationwide, and yes, they will ship direct to stores for you. Also, don't forget about the fine folks at Peterson Toyota in Fort Collins, Colorado for all of your car and truck needs. Guys, we're a few days before Christmas at this point. It's winding down. It almost doesn't feel like it here around my place in northern Colorado. Surprisingly enough, it's pushing 60 degrees out and very sunny, and I should be on the lake. There's no ice. It's crazy, but it's a work day, and I got to get some stuff done in the office before I head out with the dog. And of course, things are winding down for us just a little bit as we head into the holiday season, I imagine for you guys as well. But it's still a very busy time for us because we're in post-production, and what that means is we're producing all the TV shows that we shot over the course of the year, that we filmed all around wherever we went and filmed, and now we're putting all of those together in the editing bay and turning them into TV, as you guys might know, and YouTube channels and things, or YouTube content and things like that. So really what that means is it gives me a chance to review all the things that went well and the things that didn't go well, because one thing that's you can count on is the videos don't lie. And so, in fact, I'm going to go so far as to say, if you really want to improve your angling, film yourself and then truly watch yourself fish with an open mind and look at the mistakes you're making. Because for me, it's a huge thing to learn, and I use it every year. And when we're in post-production to make sure that that I'm not missing anything with my angling. It's helped me a ton, particularly with mechanical skills. But you can also, when you're looking at raw video, you can deduce what your mindset was a lot of the time. And I can see when I'm confident and when I'm not confident. I can hear it in my voice and things that I say. I can tell when I have the benefit of hindsight. I can see when I'm making a poor decision or a good decision because the video plays itself out and things like that. So it's a great way to judge yourself, but also it's a great way to judge your techniques. And it's, again, a very unbiased look at how a whole season of fishing went for us. So we started filming this year in April, and right at the end of April, and we filmed all the way until about 2 weeks ago. So we did a whole season of filming. We filmed in a few different states. We filmed in Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, and Minnesota this year. So relatively low number of states for us, but we still got out and about and did some stuff. And I got to look and see what was consistent and what was consistently bad, anything that we did wrong, and what key things can I take away. And we produce 13 shows a year. We have every year since 2008. We started there in January of 2009. We film at least 13 shows a year, and so I've had ample opportunity over the last 17 years to look and judge my fishing, other people's fishing around me, decision-making, everything else about it. And so I thought I'd just talk about some of that stuff this time. It's kind of a lighthearted podcast for us, but it does contain fundamental stuff. And really, to be honest, I'm looking at a Christmas tree and the sun shining outside and Santa hats and my dog giving me a dirty look, and really just feeling thankful for how the season went, and the fact that we're launching season 29, which I couldn't even imagine back in 2008 when we first signed a contract to be on TV, that we would be looking at 2025 and launching our 29th season, because for many years we did 2 seasons per year until I just got too busy to handle that much filming. But at any rate, a couple key things, and some of this will come as no surprise, some of it may come as a surprise, but some really critical things that came to head for us this year were important, and one of them was leaving fish to find fish. So that never worked. Not one time this year did that prove to be better than the fish we were on. And That goes to Minnesota, that goes to all the places we went. It happened in Kansas. I was in Kansas, caught 2 or 3 bass pretty quick, including a couple decent ones, and thought, oh man, but I know some better spots, and maybe they're bigger over there. We were catching fish that were, say, 14 to 16 inches, perfect tournament keepers for the lake we were on, but we weren't catching 5-pounders, nor were we catching, 1-pounders. And I went and ran all over the lake, looked all around, didn't find anything any better, killed 2 hours of time, finally said, nope, I'm going back to where there was other fish. That seemed like a better plan. Went back to where I'd left them, and lo and behold, we caught them really good, including fish up to 5 pounds. And if I'd have just stuck it out, we would have had that show filmed in maybe half the time, would have saved me a bunch of money. We wouldn't have burned a bunch of boat gas. We also hit a stump that day when I was out looking around, which didn't hurt anything, fortunately, but could, definitely had potential to hurt something with the boat, and did not, but we got lucky there. But the reality was I caught all my fish in the same spot that I started, and I started there just on pure instinct, and then I tried to fish memories, and that did not work. So that was one scenario of leaving fish to find fish that didn't pan out. Another day was on my home lake. I was trying to compare a dead stick rod, meaning a rod that's unattended with a bait just hanging there, and a rod with me working the bait, since I have a second rod stem, and I had both of them going, and I was catching fish with both of them, particularly with the rod I wasn't actually touching, which is a whole nother lesson in drop shotting. But at the end of the day, because it's my home lake, I've guided here for 20 years, I was dead set we could go find other fish. We left a bunch of fish because they were small. We didn't find any fish anywhere else. The ones that were biting, we were on right off the bat, and I left them, and it cost me a couple hours, came back, caught them again. Another scenario. Another one at Elkhead Reservoir, same thing. We'd caught them pretty good. But the bites were slowing down a little bit. I went looking, didn't find anything better, came back, and we caught them again. So the lesson there of leaving fish to find fish was a big one, and at no point did that work for us this year. So my answer to that, and what the takeaway is from that, is if you're still catching them, keep catching them as fast as you can, because it doesn't generally pan out to go looking for other ones if you're catching fish. If you're not catching them, by all means, keep an open mind, go looking. But if you are catching them, you're just not catching big enough ones, or the back of your brain, you're telling you it's going to be better somewhere else, you better have a pretty good hunch, because that historically doesn't work out for us more than about 30% of the time, if that. And this year it worked for us exactly 0% of the time. When we returned back to the fish we were catching, we caught them again. It does make also the argument for recording waypoints and tracks as you move around, so that you can go back to exactly where you were, particularly if it's an offshore bite, something like that. So that was a big one. Another big one for us this year, once again, fishing confidence baits. There was a whole bunch of times where we ran into bites that just didn't pan out. And my confidence baits, meaning the lures and presentations that you have the most confidence in, from extensive experience with the bait, something that you've used in a lot of places, you have a rod set up maybe for it. If you're an avid angler and you have multiple rods for multiple reasons, you maybe have a rod set up for it. My confidence presentations at the end of the day paid the bills again, regardless of what we ran into. And the opposite of that is the experimental stuff did not pay consistently. And I suppose that's why it's not a confidence presentation, it's experimental. Now, having said that, you need to keep that experimental stuff in your mindset, and you need to keep using it, because that's how stuff becomes your confidence bait. But it's a huge but. Keep the confidence lures, whatever they are, that are relevant to what you're doing fishing-wise, handy, and use them as a standard, so to speak. If you're conducting an experiment, use them as your known, because if you're not catching fish with your experimental bait and you pick up your confidence bait and you do, Well, that's going to tell you something. Conversely, if you don't catch them with either bait, maybe you're not around them at all, but at least you know it's not your confidence that's the issue. You're fishing with a solid mindset. For us, this year particularly, the jerkbait, once again, year in and year out, that thing produces fish when nothing else will. Another Kansas trip, really nothing that looked like it would work was working. I had a little bit of intel from the standpoint that I could see fish on my graphs, and they clearly were not, they were looking at baits but not biting. I get out the jerkbait in a situation where 99 out of 100 guys would never even think about a jerkbait, and we caught them really good. Why? Because I have a tremendous amount of confidence in the jerkbait's ability to get bites when fish are negative, and I deduced they were negative because we were fishing a lake that was getting pounded by a lot of bass boats, including a bass tournament that was going on. So those guys are fishing for money. And I was quite certain that if they would bite a crankbait, spinnerbait, you know, all the normal moving baits that a bass guy will throw in the middle of summer, or a jig and pig or a Texas rig or anything like that, those guys would have been catching them, and they were not catching them either. Fishing a jerkbait around flooded timber, it can be frustrating, but the flip side is I know it'll get bites, and the reason it can be frustrating is you can hang it. You've just got to be confident that if it doesn't get hung up in the trees, you'll catch some fish, and lo and behold, we caught all of our fish on the jerkbait that day. So interesting concept there. Another reservoir we went to, same thing, could not buy a bite on anything, and I was just about to give up on the lake in general, and I'm fishing flooded grass. Again, not a scenario where you would expect a jerkbait. Got the hit stick out, fished it high over the top of the grass, and we caught them really good there. You know, same thing in a few other scenarios. So a jerkbait being a confidence thing for me saved the day repeatedly. Same thing with the swim jig for largemouth. Very confidence bait for me for largemouth and pike both. And there were several occasions where that ended up being the bait that saved the day for me. And part of it is there's always a rod reel line set up with a swim jig on it if I am going largemouth fishing. That's just all there is to it. I for sure want to have a swim jig on, and because of that, I have it on the deck and I'm willing to throw it. And when the fish aren't biting, I'll pick it up and throw it and see what happens. And it proved itself to be, once again, a savior several times. A couple trips to Minnesota, a different trip to Kansas, also saved the day on one of the days in Colorado. So really, really good. Now, again, I want to throw out there that the experimental stuff is still important, but the confidence stuff. So I went trout fishing to a lake that I've fished a bajillion times, and I love to fish it. It's one of my favorites. And normally you catch them really good with a jerkbait there, and I caught a few. And but I had some experimental, so to speak, baits on the deck of the boat. One of those being what's known as a Berkeley finisher, which is kind of a gliding jig style bait. I had lots of success with it in other places, but not around grass, because I hadn't fished it around grass, for one. For two, not anywhere near a spawning season for trout. I'd caught a lot of trout on it, but they were all deep summer rainbows here in my home reservoir and a few other lakes around, and some stockers as well. So the holdovers are bigger. They're maybe anywhere from, say, 15 inches to 2 feet long, whereas the stockers are anywhere from, say, 10 to 15 or 18 inches. Both of those were produced well with the bait, but I hadn't used them in any scenario, anything like this scenario, but I wanted to try it. And the jerkbait was producing, but not well. Tube jigs and jigs were producing, but not well. And I got the experimental bait out and cleaned house with it and with the finisher. And so again, that's how you learn from them. That's how they become confidence bait. And over the course of the season, another big surprise for me was how well that finisher worked in so many scenarios. It's a brand new bait that Berkeley came out with. It was designed for bass and walleye fishing with forward-facing sonar specifically, but triggering qualities are triggering qualities. So I've said that forever. I don't care what a lure is designed to catch. I care what it will catch. And right away I recognized that the finisher would be more multi-species than that because I'm on the test team for them, and I figured it would. And be more versatile than what they were letting on, and sure enough it was. And so because of all that, then I decided, hey, this might be the right deal. I got it out, I started throwing it up there, and sure enough caught them really good with it. So I would go so far as to say that finisher will move from an experimental bait to a daily, starting lineup style bait. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a confidence bait yet, but it's definitely a bait that I'm gaining a lot of confidence in a hurry. And by the end of next season, if it produces like it did this season in so many different scenarios, it will be a bait that I reach for on a regular basis, not just when it feels right. And just for the record, my confidence baits, if you care, for sure a jerk bait, could be a floater or a suspender, could be a slow sinker even, like some of the Stunner 100s, things like that sink. But at the end of the day, it's a jerk bait of some sort, which means braided line, fast action spinning rod, lots and lots and lots of jerks and pauses, very erratic. Jerk bait for sure. A gulp minnow on a jig head or a straight minnow body on a jig head, which is hilarious to me because I've been throwing that literally since the gulp minnow was introduced. And I want to say off the top of my head that was 2005 or 6. It was certainly well before I had a TV show. And a sales rep from Berkeley was in town. He says, hey, we have these new baits. I want you to look at them and see. And they were actually in a Ziploc bag. They weren't even in production bags yet. And I looked at them like, well, it's really simple, but let's see what happens. We put it on a jig head, and I caught a walleye on the first drop, which is kind of a famous thing. For me, if you catch a bait on the first time or fish on the first time you throw a new bait, that's a good sign. And that has happened with me on several of them, including a Berkeley hit stick, which is a jerk bait, which is one of my favorites, which is hilarious because the guy that designed the bait was in the boat with me on my very first throw, and I caught a nice smallmouth with it. So that's a good sign. When I had the gulp minnow with the 3-inch minnow on the 1/8-ounce jig head, I had a Berkeley rep with me, and I caught one on the first drop. So those are both, again, good signs. But that gulp minnow or a minnow on a jig head, I should say, is one of my most confidence things. And once again this year, we threw it a ton. And it's funny because it won't show up on the film a lot because I threw it as I already described, my standard to make sure I was around fish, because everybody will bite that thing. And the astute people out there are going to say, well, why don't you throw it more if everybody will bite it? Well, for one, I'm not saying that everybody will bite it all the time. What I'm saying is it will get you in the ballpark a lot of the time. And if they're going to bite anything, they'll probably bite it. It doesn't mean it's the best thing or the fastest way to catch them or the way to catch the biggest one. It's just a way to prove to yourself that you're around fish. And I use it for that. In a lot of cases, my boat does not leave the dock for any reason without that rigged and ready to go for any species of fish, freshwater or saltwater, just for that reason, what I just said. And it doesn't matter if I'm literally fishing for bonefish in the Florida Keys, they will eat the hooks off of gulp minnow. All the way to a bass or walleye or anywhere in between. So again, that bait proved itself to be important for me as well, and so that's for sure one of my confidence baits. I already mentioned the swim jig for largemouth. It's a Berkeley power bait swim jig with a different chunk on it of some sort. This swim jig, regardless of who made it or what brand or whatever, has been a confidence bait for me for largemouth for a long time, even really before they called them swim jigs. Maybe I was just naive enough to think that I could take a flipping jig and wind it, but I did even back in the day, and it worked well. Now, of course, we have custom-made jigs for it, or jigs designed just for swim jigging, and I do use them, and that Berkeley Powerbait swim jig is a great example thereof. And you will see that a bunch this year because we caught a lot of fish on it in Minnesota. We caught a lot of fish in Kansas on it. We caught a lot of fish in Colorado on it. And again, it's a dedicated rod, reel, line combo just for that thing. And really, those are my most confidence things. A jig, a jerk bait, and that swim jig. When I say the first jig, I should say a finesse jig, like I said, the minnow jig. And then the swim jig, which is much bigger, bulkier, weed guard, all that type stuff. So those things were really critical for us this year as far as catching fish all over the place. Another critical thing that was big this year for us, grass edges and weed edges. And I think part of that is because for the last 4 years in a row, we've gone to either South Dakota or Minnesota or both to film, and that means you're going to be fishing around vegetation, a lot of vegetation, and that means working out the vegetation is a key part of your pattern as to what kind. Are they in the bulrushes? Are they in the cattails? Are they in the lily pads? Are they in the, the whatever it might be? Are they in the hydrilla grass? Are they in the Lodi grass? Whatever the combination thereof is where you need to find them. And paying attention to that paid huge for us this year, again, is to not only maybe the type of vegetation, but the health of that vegetation, particularly in the late fall filming we did, where some of the vegetation is dying. Some of the green stuff is dying and turning brown and off-gassing and make kind of a yucky, they call it cheese, on top of the surface of the water. Getting away from that stuff and fishing around the fresh green vegetation, even though it's the same species of aquatic veg, it's still very important that you be around the healthy aspects of it. So that was a critical thing for us this year, and every time we didn't pay attention to that on film, and you can see it again, I'm describing all this based on watching me and the guests film or fish all year, right? And so it's 13 different destinations, 13 different days, at least 13 different days, and so completely different styles of fishing, and these were the critical things. So that vegetation, when we got around the wrong stuff, where it was the stuff topped out too high in the water column or too low in the water column, or maybe you had to be right on the edges of it, maybe you had to be on a specific kind of it, whatever, it made a difference to pay really close attention to the aquatic vegetation. So that's another one that I'm going to stick to on a regular basis, and that can be very important. And even so much so in Kansas, when we were looking at terrestrial vegetation, which is again on the bank, not in the water, but the water was high and flooded the banks, and therefore they were in specific kinds of flooded stuff, as opposed to just all of it. You look and think, well, all this stuff looks fishy. But I grew up in South Florida, and everything's vegetation, and it all looks fishy, but they're never in all of it. They're only in certain kinds of it, and that was the same thing in Kansas. You look and you say, this whole bay looks spectacular. It's all flooded terrestrial vegetation, but then you find out they only want one specific kind of grass, and if you pay close attention to that kind of grass and where it is, you can almost call your shots. Same thing with the weed edges. We were filming for pike and large and smallmouth all the same day. The edges, I was using my Costas, using the lens. Keep your eye on the vegetation. As soon as that disappears below the surface of water, just deep enough that you can't see it anymore, run your bait right down that edge, and lo and behold, you get bit every time. And you could literally call them 2 or 3 fish in a row type things. But as soon as you get up into the veg a little bit too much, or outside of it a little bit too much, you get no bites at all. Paying attention to that, very, very important. So that was a critical thing for us here on Fishful Thinker. And then the other thing, and this is every year, I don't care what year it is, the first year, the last year, and every year in between, casting accuracy and line control make a huge difference. When I look at the fishing with guests, and even outside of filming, the people I fished with, the biggest difference between the guys that fish really well and didn't comes down a lot of time to one of two things: casting accuracy and line control, which go hand in hand, and then the other one being casting efficiency. In other words, how many of your casts are you throwing into exact spots versus how much time do you spend experimenting, extrapolating. So going back to that weed edge I was just talking about, I said if you run your bait right down that edge, you'd get bit almost every time. You could call your shots. But if you were 2 feet too shallow or 2 feet too deep, you caught nothing at all. Well, I had people on my boat that wouldn't take that seriously enough to continue to make that same throw over and over again as the boat works down the edge. They'd go 5 or 6 casts in a row without catching one, and now they're throwing into the deep water and the shallow water, and those never paid off. The efficiency of keeping your cast in and around the strike zone, really important. And that some of that comes down to accuracy, some of it comes down to line control, but some of it just comes down to paying attention where you're throwing and how adamant you are that I'm not going to throw again until my bait's going to be in the right stuff. And some of that's confidence in recognizing the right stuff. Some of it is patience. But I'm telling you right now, one good cast beats 10 bad casts every time. And I can't tell you how many times on film I'll call my shot, even to the point of we'll have show guests, and there's a whole bunch of show guests that will testify to this. If you call your shot, if you tell the camera guy ahead of time, this is really good, I should get bit right here, and it works, we give them a spiff because we applaud that. That makes for good TV. That makes for the camera guy able to get a good shot, right? But you have to recognize the scenario and do it. And the guys that do that most often are guys that are very, very observant. And I say guys, I don't mean to be saying guys only, but at the end of the day, we didn't have any women on Fishful Tinker this year, so don't yell at me. I had somebody that yelled at me before because I referred to everybody as masculine. Well, I'm sorry, but everybody that was on Fishful Tinker was masculine. So that's just how it's going to be at the end of the day. So please don't send me hate mail over that. But all of the guys that I had in my boat, you can see the difference in how dead set they were that they needed to make the right cast versus not the right cast. And again, that's not just people I filmed with, just people I fished with over the course of the year. Some of that maybe is the ability to recognize the right cast or have the confidence in it that maybe I do. And so I look at it from the other side going, well, I can tell you you're not going to get bit on that throw, but that's my confidence. It shouldn't affect his fishing, right? But it does. And you can see people that are for sure confident and not. And the more throws you make into your money spots, the better off you are. And if I can, over the course of 20 minutes, make 10 good throws instead of making 50 average throws, then I'm going to catch more fish. I'm going to spook less fish. I'm going to have less chance of having my line out when I need it in. In other words, I need to be casting because now I have the right angle, but my bait's way out there because I got impatient and made a throw. Now I got to wind it all the way in and then throw it. That kind of thing. So paying attention so that your casts are every cast should be very serious. Like Kevin Van Dam, the best bass fisherman of all time, has said, if you're thinking about your next cast instead of the cast you're on, just wind it up and throw the next one because you're not concentrating on the cast you have, and therefore your confidence is not going to be where it should be. So I believe in that same thing. Every time I got a bait out that I'm not 100% confident in, I just wind that thing in and go somewhere else quickly because, again, you don't want to waste. The other thing that was important this year along those same lines was just quick decisions. When I've got a chrome jerkbait and a white jerkbait, every time the sun goes behind the cloud, I literally, without even making a cast, you drop the chrome one and pick the white one up, and vice versa. Decisions like that. Every time the breeze come up, you grab the crankbait that rattles, and as soon as that wind lays back down on a gusty wind day, then you drop it and grab the crankbait without rattles. And that might only be 1 or 2 more fish over the course of a day. But hey, a TV show only needs a half dozen or a little more, and it makes all the difference in the day. A tournament day only needs 5 fish. And I can tell you from dealing with most people, Joe Average out there, 1 or 2 fish makes the day. And so if you can get 1 extra fish or 2 extra fish, because you're paying attention to all of this stuff and acting accordingly, it will definitely make a difference for you. The last thing I want to throw out there, and this is way out on a limb from anything that I normally would talk about a whole bunch, but I'm gonna anyway. If you're a guy that uses power bait for trout, specifically power bait, dough bait, specifically, where you're taking a ball of power bait and you put it on a hook and you put it out there and you wait for trout, you are seriously missing the boat by not molding that into a shape and retrieving it, because I'm not a power bait guy. You guys know that. If you've listened to our podcast for the last 3 years, you know we don't throw a lot of bait in general. But I've been experimenting with stuff for Berkeley specifically, for one specific project that I can't talk about, for one. And for two, I live in a place where a very high percentage of people do throw power bait, and therefore, for me to stay relevant, it behooves me to be familiar with all of the different techniques, including power bait. Well, what I found out is if you mold that stuff into a specific shape of some sort where it will spin or wobble along the lines of a spoon or an inline spinner, and then you throw it and retrieve it with a split shot ahead of it, or something just enough weight that you can throw it and it will pull it down so you can retrieve it, you're going to catch a ton more trout, for one, and for two, you're not going to deep hook those trout. So if you're a guy that's throwing power bait and you'd learned nothing else from me over the last years, learn to mold it into a shape that will spin, and look up some videos on our YouTube channel. I've done videos about it. And then retrieve it so that it has its own built-in action. Just continuously retrieve it like you would a spoon or a spinner, and you're going to find out you're going to catch a lot more trout, and they're not going to be deep hooked. You're going to be able to release them if you want, or eat them if you want. It's not going to be dictated by the fact that the fish swallowed your bait. So that's all I wanted to talk about today, guys. I know I ramble a lot, and I apologize for that, but I would also want to say thank you very much for listening to our podcast. Hopefully, you're a subscriber to our YouTube channel. Maybe you watch us on Roku or World Fishing Network or Altitude Sports Entertainment or wherever network you watch us on. But I appreciate it very much. It means a lot as we get ready to launch season 29 here. Who knows how many more years I can do this, but the fact that we've made it this far has been a blessing, and that's specifically because of the folks at Sportsman's Warehouse and Toyota and Peterson Toyota and Berkeley and Abu Garcia and Fraybill and Plano and Costa Sunglasses and Crowley Marine Boats and Ranger Boats and everybody else that makes this possible for us. Very, very important, and consider them for your own buying stuff going forward. So with that, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, have a great holiday week with friends and family, and we'll talk to you just before the new year. This has been Fishful Thinker, the podcast.